Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I know most of the audience will be in Canada, so it's good morning, but it's indeed good afternoon for most of your panelists today. We're starting this morning with Europe and Canada addressing global challenges together, science diplomacy as a strategic approach. So we have brought here together participants from quite a few international cooperation expert institutions. My name is Elke Dall. I coordinate a European project funded under Horizon 2020, which deals with science diplomacy. I'm based in Austria at the Center for Social Innovation, and the project is called FECYT. The co-moderator, Lorenzo Melchor, is also working with me in this project. He is based in Spain. And at FECYT, the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology. Then we have invited also another project working on a similar topic funded under the same call, which is called Inside. And Rasmus Bertelsen is going to join us. He is a work package leader in this project and also works at the Arctic University of Norway. And you see the links also to both of these projects down on the slides, where we present kind of like the websites that we recommend you to visit, as well as our social media channels. There is another EU project that has unfortunately already ended, but is continued in many other formats for the EU-Canada cooperation, called ERACAN. And so we thought that would be a nice hashtag for our session. And Martina Desole from APRE, the Agency for the Promotion of European Research in Italy, is going to join us as a long-term coordinator of that project and continuing working on the EU-Canada cooperation. Izaskun Lacunza, another panelist, also from the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology, FECYT. And then we have, of course, thank you very much, Rémi, a Canadian participant, the chief scientist of Quebec, Rémi Quirion. And last but not least, another colleague from FECYT and work package leader there, Mitchell Young, who is working on science diplomacy at the Charles University in Prague in the Czech Republic. What brings us together here today is that we wanted to discuss with you and amongst ourselves the opportunities for science diplomacy between the EU and Canada. We understand as under this term something that includes a variety of fields at the intersection of science, higher education, science policy on the one hand side, and foreign policy and international relations on the other hand side. So that includes science advice that informs, for example, international diplomacy, or international science cooperation that improves these kind of diplomatic relations. And then we have international diplomacy that can facilitate these kind of cooperations and really improve those. And then there is a variety of actors and instruments involved in this cooperation. And in order for now you to warm up to this panel and to start the discussion, I would like to invite each of the panelists for a very quick statement. So we agreed that it would be like a minute just to get to know you, for you to get to know the panelists. And I would like to ask them briefly to introduce themselves and to like their background, and also to refer to something that they consider particularly important when it comes to connecting the EU and Canada. And we would start with Mitchell.
Great, thanks so much. I think Elke has explained much of my background, but let me just say as well that I'm somehow bi-Atlantic, if that's a word. I was born in the United States, and I've now spent about half my life in the Czech Republic, a little bit more, in fact. I guess when I think about the Canada and EU, if I wanted to be a little bit provocative, I would say, well, these countries are not hotheads. What I envision is stable and reliable partners that share a belief in multilateralism, liberal governance, liberal values in world affairs. And I guess I would also say that they share not being military superpowers, and so they need other ways to express leadership on a global level.
Thanks, Mitchell. Rasmus, would you like to continue? I think, Rasmus, we don't have your audio. You there?
Yes, do you hear me now?
Yes, now it's perfect.
Good. So, yes, hello everybody, bonjour tout le monde. As mentioned, I am professor at the Arctic University of Norway and work package leader in InSight, which is coordinated from Sorbonne University and CNRS, and I'm actually sitting here at the Sorbonne University right now in Paris. And following up on what Mitchell said, yes, Europe and Canada are what one could say they are parts of the world that often contribute to helping the world, development aid, peacekeeping, human rights, etc. And Europe and Canada, of course, has very strong traditional ties. One tie is between the United Kingdom and Canada in the Commonwealth, and another tie is between Canada and France in La Francophonie. And but the Canadian-European tie, it's of course embedded in broader international political frameworks, where, for example, the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, that of course affects that relationship. The United States is a very important partner for both Canada and Europe. Now we have passed the American election. And yes, as I mentioned, another connection among many between Europe and Canada is, for example, La Francophonie. So there are many ties that tie Europe and Canada together in their international efforts, which have often been in areas as development, peacekeeping, human security, etc. Thank you.
Thanks.
Merci.
And maybe that's a good occasion to mention also that if you have questions, I think you can ask them in both languages, in English and French. We will try to do our best to answer adequately. And feel free to use the Q&A button already during the session. We will have a Q&A session in the middle of our discussion. And with this, I would like to invite Rémi for some introductory words.
Oui, bon matin à tous. Un plaisir d'être avec vous. Really a pleasure to be with you. I'm a bit of the outsider, and great to have all the colleagues from Europe here. My background, I'm a neuroscientist, McGill University for close to 30 years. And now almost for the past 10 years as a Quebec chief scientist. And of course, science diplomacy is a tool that is developing a lot over the past decade, I'll say. And with the pandemic, we have seen that everything is global, so that the science diplomacy can be a way to strengthen link between countries. And certainly Canada, EU, already a lot of collaboration, but we must do more, we must do better, and especially in terms of talent, in terms of brain. So focusing on the people and exchanging best practice, exchanging talent between Canada and the EU, certainly critical and something we want to foster in the future.
Thanks so much. Izaskun, would you like to continue?
Hello, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, Elke. So yes, my name is Izaskun Lacunza, and as Elke was saying, I work in the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology, and I am partners in S4D4C. For a number of years already, we are advocating for a European Union science diplomacy that contributes to addressing global challenges. And there is something very clear for us, and it is that our European science diplomacy vision is totally incomplete without a global outreach and a multilateral approach. I can only agree with what my colleagues have said about the Canada and the European Union ties. These are very clear and the opportunities very clear. And we truly believe that science diplomacy can actually foster these ties towards a common vision on how to address global challenges. So it is a real pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much. And last but not least, Martina, a few words from your end.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. My name is Martina Desole. I work as the Head of International Cooperation in APRE and as a former coordinator of the ERACAN project and actual coordinator of the program level cooperation task force between Europe and Canada. And I would like to echo the colleagues in saying that we have really shared values. And when it comes to work together, especially in a research environment, what I can see is really helping the researchers coming together are especially the values of openness, transparency, and also the main policies from Europe and for Canada that are actually focusing on equity, diversity, and inclusion. I see that this is really a common ground where we are actually acting and having a policies that is also directing research efforts towards a more ethical approach and the integrity of research as well.
Thank you. So, and now everyone listening has seen that we're very interested now that we need to get more Canadian input. There is a lot to build on to jointly address, but we need to get also the audience and the audience opinion. So I hand over to Lorenzo, who moderates a quick session about getting to know you as the audience there.
Well, somehow I had let's switch off. Anyhow, it's a real pleasure to be engaging in the Canadian Science Policy Conference, which is one of the top leading conferences in relation to science policy, science advice, or science diplomacy. So it's again a pleasure for SPC to be engaging with you in this debate. I'd like to start our first polling question, because we want to get to know what you think, all the audience, about all these ties that our panelists have introduced about Europe and Canada. So the first question is, which global challenges do you consider most important in EU-Canada cooperation? You may select up to 3 out of this list. Pandemics and global health. We are all living COVID-19 situations. Climate change, population aging, cybersecurity, food and water sustainability, energy sustainability, eradication of poverty, management of oceans and the Arctic region, forest management, or others. There are 20 seconds left to select maximum 3 options. I'm not sure whether we as panelists are able to cast our votes as well, but if we can, I would ask you to do it. So 2 seconds, 1, 0. Let's see the result. And apparently, climate change, pandemics, and management of oceans and the Arctic region are the top 3 global challenges that we have to cope with. Maybe the European Union and Canada can reinforce their ties to tackle these 3 challenges. But let's move to the second polling question. Let's see if we have it on the screen. Yes. So, in your opinion, which options are the most important in EU-Canada relationships beyond scientific cooperation? Select again a maximum of 3 options, and you may choose from economic missions and NATO alignment, the shared set of values, willing to address challenges, support for multilateralism, all the historical and linguistic relationships that are present already between the European Union and Canada, and everything to do with diaspora networks or other field. It's 10 seconds remaining. Again, our panelists are free also to cast their votes. And we hope to be delving on these issues during the roundtable. So apparently, our audience think that one of the strongest relationships between the European Union and Canada is our shared willingness to address global challenges. The second one would be trade and support for multilateralism. Well, you are in the right panel because perhaps we are sharing also these values. Let's see what we discuss about these issues. Technical team, please, let's move to the third and final polling question of this first round. Which three aspects do you think are more important when promoting science diplomacy as a strategic approach? It is about fostering collaborations between nations. It's about improving national competitiveness. It's about promoting international scientific collaborations, thematic agreements, the development of new multilateral and frameworks, and others. It's good that you have it on the screen because it would be quite difficult to remember all these options by heart. But you may again select up to 3 options, and once again, our panelists are free to cast their votes. 6 seconds remaining. 5, 3, 2, 1. Let's see the results. So apparently, promoting international scientific collaborations is the most important when promoting science diplomacy strategies. The second one would be fostering collaboration between nations, facilitating multilateralism and international cooperation. Of course, it's a fond willingness to promote collaboration will also use competitiveness or competition approaches. Science diplomacy is also about those. So back to Elke, and I am eager to listen to our experts.
Thanks so much, Lorenzo. It seems the connection to Madrid was not exactly perfect today. So I hope that we can improve maybe the audio connection a little bit from the technical side. But in any case, I hope the line to Austria is good for you. And also the line to Prague. So basically, Mitchell would be, again, the first one that I would like to invite for a panel contribution, where we were thinking to start the discussion a little bit with him outlining some main drivers and trends in science diplomacy today and the particular grand challenges that he sees. So Mitchell, that would be yours to start. Thank you.
Thanks, Elke. Hopefully the sound will come through well. I guess I'll start with talking a little bit about this sort of dilemma that we see and we've been talking about a lot in the S4D4C project. And of course, the project itself is oriented towards global challenges. How do we use science diplomacy for addressing global challenges? And what I see, what we see are two distinct and contradictory trends in international affairs. And I think this is nothing new, but we see this growing geopolitical competition that rests on sort of zero-sum conceptions of the national interest, the power politics. And at the same time, we see an expansion of cooperative global governance efforts. And these are based on the recognition that we face common global challenges And just maybe to throw out not a definition, but a sort of a sense of this concept, when we talk about global challenges, we mean complex global level problems that are knowledge intensive and cannot be addressed by only one country. And I think the knowledge intensive part is something that I want to emphasize here, since we're talking about science diplomacy. Global challenge requires some kind of knowledge advances, and they require all types of science diplomacy, whether we're talking about bilateral or multilateral, going through international organizations, when we're talking about bottom-up science-driven cooperation or government-driven science diplomacy efforts. And so what I wanted to talk about in the couple of minutes that I have is how we see this tension playing out, with a couple of examples tied to COVID-19, which is, I think, become sort of, at least for the moment, the preeminent global challenge, although I was glad to see that climate change in the little survey we just did still came out on top. But in a policy brief that we wrote earlier this year, building better science diplomacy through the COVID crisis, we had some ideas about that, and I'll mention two. One has to do with narratives and the importance of narratives. And I think if we go back to the very early days of the crisis, there was a remarkably common global narrative based on flattening the curve and social distancing. And that commonality of narrative, I would say, has been lost. We're witnessing more and more a politicization of the crisis. We're seeing cleavages, we're seeing misinformation that's rampant. We're seeing challenges to the World Health Organization, and that's not to say that the World Health Organization hasn't made mistakes in its scientific efforts even. But we've gone, I think, from a period of a lot of hopefulness for global governance at the very outset of this crisis, even though we were facing a crisis, to really a reversion, I would say, to the status quo and zero-sum politics. And in fact, Michael Zern, in an interesting book, says that as things become more important globally, we should expect to see politicization increasing. And I think the challenge that we face, that I'll put out as the first challenge, is how do we make science politically useful? How do we embed it in policymaking and narratives, but at the same time keep it apolitical? And the second example that I'll throw out here has to do with open science. And I want to go back again to the very beginning, very early days of the crisis, when we were basically desperate, right, for any kind of concrete information about the virus that we could obtain. We knew nothing. And the result was this massive mobilization of science, an incredible number of publications. By some counts, we now have over 100 or 150,000 publications. But also with most of these, we have open access to them. And I think what's important to recognize here is that this open access was pre-negotiated. That unlike a lot of the ad hoc approaches to COVID that we see happening in the political sphere today, there was an agreement on data sharing in public health emergencies. It was enacted immediately. Other publishers came into that agreement, so there was a spillover effect to publishers that hadn't signed the agreement originally. And so we almost have complete open access right now on this. And this is an example, and a very one that we can be proud of, an example of science diplomacy. And it's also an example of the need to develop kind of frameworks in advance of crises and the role of science diplomacy in advance of crisis situations. So coming back just to wrap things up, I hope I have another couple of seconds, to this first tension I mentioned. And the heart of that, right, is that there's simultaneously, we need to address competition and cooperation. And this is true, I think, both in science and in politics, where we have this mixture of cooperative interest and competitive interest. In science, we have a race to be first, but we also have a tremendous amount of sharing and commonality in our research projects. And I think that in order to really address this, we need to recognize that there are multiple faces of power. And we can't only be thinking of power to coerce, but we need to be thinking about what is often called the second, third, or fourth face of power, the power to set new agendas and to solve problems. And I think when we think of power in terms of global challenges, we need to start to think about the power to achieve certain objectives as a cooperative force, and not only the power over other actors to make them do what we want. And I'll end there.
Perfect. Now it's super in time. Thank you very much. We wanted to invite Rasmus from his background and speciality in international relations, and looking at the particular focus now on Europe and North America. How do you think that these geopolitical shifts that are mentioned can be strategically addressed in or through science diplomacy?
Yeah, Elke, do you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Yes, Mitchell, thank you very much for a very thought-provoking statement, because I think there's another way to look at this dichotomy between competitive politics and cooperation. Because if we look back, if we just look back since the end of the Second World War, then of course we've had a UN system which was largely built and funded by a United States that had overwhelming power, overwhelming economic, military, scientific, cultural, etc. power. And we had the Cold War, a bipolar system. Then the West won the Cold War, the Soviet Union disintegrated. And then we had a couple of decades of undisputed American power. And I suspect that because we basically here, we represent the West, and we very much benefited from that undisputed power, and then power becomes invisible. But the rest of the world saw that power very clearly. And as what we see as a, as a return of geopolitics is the end of that undisputed American power. And that end is both because of internal processes in American society, which we have seen very much in the last two presidential elections, and then of course the rise of China and the rise of the West. And I think the challenges that Mitchell very well set out, there's a big difference between addressing such challenges when you have one superpower at the end of the table, one superpower with the political, economic, military, scientific power to set the agenda and also largely to pay for it. And then the situation which we are moving into today, where the world's two largest economies will be the United States and China, with repercussions also for science, and where perhaps Western societies are not in the shape they used to be. Look at Brexit, as I say, the last American presidential elections. So how do we address these challenges that Mitchell set out very well in a world where you don't have the Western leadership which we're used to, and which I think we in the West were not very aware of because we were, benefiting from it. But I think that will be the big challenges going forward, addressing the challenges Mitchell set out in a much less Western world and in a world where big Western societies will not be in the shape they used to be. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And I think now we would be super interested because Rémi, you're close by. This is on the other side of the Atlantic, what's happening there. And what's your perspective on the US and maybe also from your subnational perspective as well. And we would be really interested on your position and if engagement with Europe is something that is an important part of your science diplomacy.
Yeah, certainly, and thanks to Mitchell and Rasmus for their comments. I must say, what I can say about the U.S. election on the Canadian side was, oof, finally, maybe it will be a bit easier, although it's still not clear, and there will be tension in the US, of course, for years to come. And yes, you change president, but still issues will remain. But again, I'd like to come back to the pandemic. I think science globally has never been as visible than during the pandemic. At least for me, in Quebec, in Canada, it opened door in many government offices. So yes, of course, the higher education, science, innovation, the minister associated with that, of course, a lot of links. But some of them may be a bit less. But now they see science in the news every day. So it's much easier to discuss, to connect with high-level policymaker in government as well as with elected officials. So that maybe, in a sense, is a little bit of a positive aspect of the pandemic. Open science, as was mentioned, certainly also big drive forward on that one, with a lot of important working group at WHO, UNESCO. I'm very much involved with INGSA, the International Network for Government Science Advice, and much more prominent as well than it used to be. So very positive on that side, with being very agile, quick response, looking for solution, not looking for problem, because often between government we see that they seem that they focus more on the problem than the positive aspects. I think we need to find a way. It's not easy to use that in, for example, EU and Canada to work together on the Sustainable Development Goal, like climate change, for instance. We have been able to do that quickly in the context of the pandemic, how to apply that. And of course, it's not a direct line, but how to apply that to the SDGs. And for that, bring on board the Global South. Certainly that will be critical. And I think that EU and Canada can do that. If we cannot do it, nobody else will be able to do it. So certainly it's a challenge for us to work more closely together on the SDGs, bring on board the Global South in Africa, in South America, Southeast Asia. So I think really that it's possible to do that. So that will be a challenge that I will give out to all of us, that in terms of science diplomacy, now we need to move very aggressively in regard to SDGs, working more closely together, Canada and the US. And last point, not forgetting the public. Bring on board the citizen, because this is yes, maybe we need to talk with the minister, with other policymaker, but we need to make sure that now climate change touch everyone, not just someone in New York City or in Ottawa in Canada. I think bring on board the citizen will be much stronger than if we just talk to each other as academician or high-level policymaker.
Yeah, thanks, Rémi, for those points. Very important ones. Martina, I think you have a few success stories that you can share of the past, so that we can maybe have some conclusions for the future of how we can address those points. How's the situation from your point of view?
Yeah. First of all, I would really like to echo Mitchell, because I think that also regarding the current situation with the pandemic, it was very important to have a framework where to act, to have an established relation that managed really to react very quickly. And from the past, the experience I would like to bring, it has been more than 10 years of funding from the side of the European Commission to the ERACAN project, that became actually a platform that in a way fostered the really international cooperation, creating both a network of researchers and innovators, but also helped in identifying common priorities and started a dialogue among policymakers. This part is still alive with the task force, but I think this is really important, the consistency in the relations, and to have a midterm investment, also funding projects that are helping creating a network also among intermediaries that will kind of facilitate and be the glue between the researchers and the governments as well. So I think that this did also support the different provinces and the federal government and the European Commission in identifying a specific topic to finance from both sides. I believe that one of the real success stories from the EU-Canada cooperation, it is that both invested in research and innovation projects from both sides. Of course, Europe had Horizon Europe that is an open to the world, Horizon 2020 that is an open to the world, and FP7 as well program. Also from the Canadian side, especially from Quebec, that since at least 10 years have an open program to finance Quebecois researchers to participate in Horizon project, in the framework projects. So I think that this way of addressing, so to support the existing cooperation where it is already mature, like in the health sector, where actually CIHR doesn't need a platform to support their dialogue with the European Commission, but to explore also different niche topics where there is a will from the researcher side to cooperate and to find the fundings. It's also important. We saw also a very important pilot that was to launch a flagship on the data management in health that was funded both from Canada and from Europe, and that has been a huge success, creating really a cascade effect in other projects that will be actually helping. And talking about data management in health, this is also, of course, helping in this current situation. So this is a thematic alignment to have these consistent fundings and create networks of researchers, innovators, but also like practitioners of science diplomacy like ourselves, and different levels of the government, because Canada has also a peculiar system compared to Europe, because we have provincial fundings, not only federal fundings, and we have the territories. And also another thing, and then I close, it has been really supporting the creation of a national contact point network and a regional contact point network, where actually Canadians knows who to talk to if they want to get in touch with European researchers as well. So all in all, I think this really did nourish a cooperation that was already there among researchers. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. And I think we're also available in case there are some questions after these sessions about this, the provincial funding, or how to reach these national or provincial contact points, etc. So feel free to get in touch with us both through the Q&A option that you have here now, but actually also afterwards. So from S4D4C, I will be very happy to liaise and get you in touch with the right people in case you listen to the recording or have now some questions in your mind about the things that were mentioned so far. And as a final panelist, I wanted to ask Izaskun if she could share a little bit with us the vision that we have established, or that was coming out of several S4D4C activities for science diplomacy addressing global challenges, and how that could be applied to foster the alliances between Europe and Canada. And just to say, after this, we have a short polling, and then we would have to answer your questions and answers. We have to answer your questions. So please post them into the tool. So Izaskun, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elke. So let me tell you a bit about how we have been working together in the S4D4C project in coming up with a jointly European Union science diplomacy vision. The first consideration probably is about science diplomacy being a tool for something else. I think it was Rémi who mentioned it in the beginning of our talk, and we saw it in the poll as well. You can have a science diplomacy strategy for a number of issues: improving national competitiveness, developing the brand of your own country, influencing other nations, etc. Well, in our work in S44C, it was clear for us from the beginning, although it took us a while and some discussions, to agree that we were going to analyze science diplomacy as a tool for addressing global challenges. And that was the first agreement we came up with. So after that, and one of the first things we did was to celebrate our first global meeting with experts from all over the world in Madrid. And out of those discussions, we launched the Madrid Declaration on Science Diplomacy, in which, as I say, signatures from all over the world wanted to raise the awareness about the need to strengthen science diplomacy as a need to support universal scientific and democratic values and for addressing global challenges. Interestingly, the declaration supported a very inclusive science diplomacy definition where not only diplomats, neither scientists were actually working on science diplomacy, either implicit or explicitly. And also quoting Rémi again, and very important for us, we identified science diplomacy as a means, as something that needed to bring value for citizens, as a main principle of science diplomacy as well. It was Dr. Mona Nemer from Canada, the Chief Scientific Advisor to Canada's Prime Minister, who took part in that discussion. And we don't have that many Canadian signatures other than Mona. So we really encourage you to read the declaration and let us know if you agree and you would like to sign it. So once we had agreed on, as I said, the common understanding on what kind of science diplomacy we were talking about, we organized yet another conference very much focused on the European Union, how the Madrid Science Diplomacy Declaration could somehow be translated into a truly European science diplomacy vision and strategy. Of course, every region has its complexities and the European Union has theirs. And we wanted to analyze how does the multi-governance system influence a common potential science diplomacy strategy? How do European values and science values interact? So after those discussions in our second conference, we published the report calling for a systemic change towards a European science diplomacy for addressing global challenges, in which we propose a vision for the European Union that builds on the Madrid Declaration on science diplomacy, on the European and scientific values, and where we also identified barriers, stoppers, warnings, and drivers for that vision to be fulfilled. Finally, we propose a number of recommendations in the different dimensions that we believe will facilitate the alignment of different stakeholders to the European science diplomacy vision. And coming back to that vision, what we propose is the European Union becoming a key global player in addressing global challenges and in acknowledging scientific knowledge as an important dimension to our foreign policy. Of course, the European Union cannot solve global challenges on their own, and we really believe that science diplomacy can become a fundamental asset for the European Union to strengthen links with other countries with common values and goals. And of course, Canada is part of this vision that the European Union should be having. Thank you, Elke.
Well, thank you, Izaskun, for giving this short outline for the audience and highlighting those points. And I see now some questions coming in, and they tie in quite well. So you probably, after our polling, maybe you can already prepare to answer a question that asks for a few more specificities, like how do we propose to foster better scientific cooperation, and what kind of key policies we recommend to implement. So I think that would be a good question to start, but we have two more that we're going to bring to your attention. while Lorenzo is also running the poll with the audience.
So I hope that my connection behaves better this time. So let's see if we answer again some questions. Is the US central to the European Union and Canadian cooperation? From 1 to 5, 1 not at all, 2 not quite, 3 neither no nor yes, 4 yes quite, or 5 yes a lot. And we have 30 seconds to respond, and in the meantime allow me also to elaborate more on the outstanding production that we are having from S4D4C, not only the Madrid Declaration on Science Diplomacy, but also some other policy reports and empirical research case studies led by Mitchell here, and also some theoretical studies about the taxonomy of science diplomacy, the state of the art, as well as the governance frameworks for which science diplomacy is elaborated on. It's 1 minute, 1 second left. Yes, so yes, quite. The United States is quite central to the European Union and Canadian cooperation, according to our audience. And our panelists have said so as well. Let's move to the next question. I think we have another one. Has COVID changed the rule of the game? Not at all, not quite, neither no nor yes, yes quite, or yes a lot. It was good also to listen from Rémi and Izaskun the key role that the citizens might play or should play in science diplomacy as well. And we heard also from Rasmus, we need to tackle global challenges at a time that no Western leadership is so far very clear, and also when our Western societies are going into a kind of a crisis in its democratic systems with populism, polarization, and many other aspects, pseudoscience as well. Let's see the results of here. And yes, quite, and yes a lot, COVID-19 has changed the rules of the game. And let's see if our panelists elaborate a little bit on this result. I don't know, we have a third question perhaps? Technical team? What is your estimate? How many Canadian participations have been recorded in the Horizon 2020 program between 2014 and 2020? We were talking about European Union and Canadian collaboration, and Canada has been able to collaborate in the Horizon 2020 program as an associated country. So it may be between 0 and 50 collaborations, 51 and 100, 101 and 250, 251 and 500, or 501 to 1,000, or even more than 1,001. For sure, Martina will give us some clues about these figures, as she is seeking strengthening collaborations between the European Union and Canada. 2 seconds left, and the result, audience think that, well, perhaps it's between 101 and 500. We'll see if that is the right answer or not. Over back to our panelists, and I hope we have some interesting questions for them also from the audience.
I think first it's good to unleash kind of like the panelists on the questions. So I think Martina can answer the last one, and
Well, yeah, I think because I don't know, I share with you the latest data, but I think it is more than 250. So, but it's less than 500. So, anyways, it is a very good a very good number, and Canada is among the first 3 cooperators of third countries with Europe.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, and there is this Horizon 2020 dashboard that can also be Googled by everyone, because it's all open data, and every Canadian participant can also have a look at who are those. I think it was 250 something. It was definitely more than 250. Yes, that was the correct answer. Who are those entities that have those partnerships and that have this experience in this Horizon 2020 program, and so on. So I think I'll open also up with this question that I read out already before. Who of you would want to answer this particular one? How do you propose to foster better scientific collaboration between Canada and the EU, the key policies that we recommend to implement? I don't know. Should I assign the question to someone? No, there's Rasmus' hand. And I'm happy also then to give it to Izaskun. So Rasmus, would you start?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, it's perfect.
I think Rémi, he mentioned very early on, he mentioned the importance of human capital and talent. I mean, basically training people. And a very simple example is that I, as professor in Tromsø in far northern Norway, I have within the last couple of years, I've had a PhD student from University of British Columbia visiting, and I've had a PhD student from Laval visiting. So simply having, how to say, the circulation of students, the circulation of PhD students, the circulation of postdocs is extremely valuable. And you can move, for example, PhD students, you can move them quite cheaply. So I'm optimistic that, for example, if PhD students get to circulate between Europe and Canada, well, the effects here and now may be limited, but you establish the connections, you establish the relationships that may materialize 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And there are all kinds of programs and funding, etc. One typical problem it is that, how to say, universities don't have the administrative capacity to apply. I mean, professors simply don't have the time to apply for the money to send PhD students back and forth. But I think simple brain circulation, that is rather cheap, and I suspect highly effective way in the long term. And then just to add one more thing, and that is, of course, both Europe and Canada, for many reasons, languages, high quality education, we also, I mean, we receive a lot of people from the rest of the world. I mean, if you're in Vancouver, you see how many Asians are there. If you're in Montreal, you see how many people from Francophone Africa, from the Middle East, and also in Europe, of course. And therefore, both Europe and Canada, I mean, we have very strong connections to the rest of the world, which we should be very aware of and use. And not just to educate the rest of the world, but also to listen to the rest of the world and to learn from the rest of the world.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a colonialization of sorts. I just want to mention also that, of course, we had prepared several more rounds of questions to each of you, but you might have to squeeze in the messages that you want to give into the questions from the audience, because I would like to give them the priority. Izaskun and then Rémi, your reaction on this one, and then I would read out another question.
Thank you, Elke. So I am a truly huge fan of the European Research and Development Frameworks, which, as you will know, it's the common pot of the European Union that sets up the budget and the priorities for European research. And I think that it has been tremendously successful in the sense that by putting money together and collaborating and competing at the same time, which is one of the things that we are discussing at the moment. It has been great for the internal integration of the European Union and towards the creation of the European research area. We are sharing common values. We are working together in projects with countries that were killing each other not so long ago. I mean, I think it's fantastic. And I like very much Carlos Moeda's ideas, our previous commissioner, of moving from the European research area, which is what we are building with that framework, towards the global research area. Why not building a global fund on research with common rules and allowing researchers from all over the world to both collaborate and compete towards global challenges, issues, or something that we agreed upon globally? I think that this is kind of a dreamer idea from the commissioner, but we should somehow pursue it because, I mean, it has worked for the European Union very good.
Rémi, your reaction on this? No, you need to unmute yourself or something. There is a little audio hiccup.
Yeah, sorry. I'm not used to, I've been doing that only for 8 months now, so that natural. So I still forget the mic. What was just mentioned, I had the opportunity over the past couple of 2, 3, 4 years to meet with Carlos Moedas quite a few times, and the idea of a global type of strategy is certainly great, something that certainly the province of Quebec, in terms of funding organization, would be very open to, as well, of course, in terms of Canada. Just come back to talent, what Rasmus mentioned, saying more exchange. I must say that we, as was mentioned, we receive a lot of young researchers from all over the world to Canada. The young Canadian, maybe they are too well off at home to send them to France or to the UK or other part of Europe is challenging. So maybe we have to build better bridges there. One little thing that we did recently at the Quebec Research Fund, that in addition to having regular postdoc in science or various disciplines, we also now have PhD students that are finishing their PhD that want to do a postdoc that could go for science diplomacy in Quebec office all over the world. So we started that. London and Munich were the first two. And I was thinking that probably it would be people in political science or social sciences. No, astrophysics and physics were the two. And now they are hooked on science diplomacy. So that may be a way also to build capacity. In terms of focus between Canada and the EU, if we want to be a great success, I think we'll have to have some focus. We cannot do everything. And again, I'll bring back SDGs, but maybe focusing on 1 or 2 or 3 of these SDGs. Certainly climate change in the Arctic could be one that we could focus on. ADI is another one we could focus on, but again, not just between Canada and Europe, but more globally with the South.
Okay, if I may, there is a usual question here, and it's related to COVID-19 and the pandemic, but Martina, I saw your hand being raised. Allow me to just speak out this question, and if you want, you deliver an answer for that or to any of the other questions that are already on the table. The pandemic has shown significant politicization of science in many countries. What can science diplomacy do to avoid the challenges incurred by this? Is there an inherent tension between science, with its shared language, and diplomacy, focused on national interests? What do you have to comment on this?
Yeah, maybe I will leave the link towards science diplomacy to the colleagues. But what I wanted to point out also regarding the Izaskun a proposal of a global funding is that actually we are in this pandemic world right now. And this has changed very much the rules of the game, also for Europe, because now more than ever we are talking about tax sovereignty and the necessity to find autonomy, especially in issues that are dealing with the capacity of Europe of funding source and provide crucial raw materials, services, technologies in a secure and safe way for industry, for the citizens. So let's say that the world has a little bit changed. So we need to find a balance between openness, but also the autonomy for each country, because we have shown our vulnerabilities in being dependent, especially when it comes to value chains from third countries, especially from some third countries. So I'm also interested in hear from you how science diplomacy can be this bridge between this need of finding openness, but also to preserve autonomy and to have this kind of new approach towards tax sovereignty as well.
Thank you, Martina. Anyone else who wants to react on this question? And I think it was also upvoted by the colleagues. Mitchell, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, sorry, my hand is kind of not making its way right in front of my face. I wanted to address this one, and what jumped out at me in this question is this language in quotes. And as well address the question of the US coming back in and maybe pull that together into some of the things that I was thinking about in the question that you had asked us to think about, or me to think about, in terms of norms. When I see this language in quotes, I'm immediately reminded, right, of the new High Representative Borrell, and he said that Europe needs to learn to speak the language of power. And he doesn't necessarily, I don't think, mean military power, but he means a more geopolitical understanding of power, more focused on interest rather than values. At the same time, I think if we think about sort of the EU, norms and values are very central to the way it has conceived of its foreign policy, at least since the global strategy of 2016, which suggests that norms and values have to go together with interest on an equal level. And of course, I don't mean to suggest that he's also not very interested in values. If we talk about things like multilateralism and other sort of liberal democratic values, he very much, I think, if I read his speeches, I see those values there in them as well. But the challenge, I think, is how do you build a foreign policy on norms? And I think if we're talking about sort of the EU and Canada relationships, and we can say, yes, the norms are very important, the values are very important to bring us together to say, okay, here's how we want to work on certain things. I think if we come to this question of, well, what does it mean that the US comes back in? It's great that the US is coming back in. It's extremely important that the US is coming back in if we hope to solve global challenges. But, and I think Rasmus made an excellent point when he said, look, the world, we're coming into a world that is much less Western right now. And so despite the fact that the US comes in, which seems to mean something like that the Western world is kind of on common ground and more unified in its values, we need to figure out how do we deal with other countries that don't share those same values. And that's a huge problem. I mean, what do you do with values that other people reject? And I think that's the challenge of today. And I think if we look at, say, China, for example, and Chinese authoritarianism, we see that all the earlier assumptions, right, that liberalizing the economy would bring democracy, or even Merton's belief, right, that only in a free and democratic system could sort of true science thrive. And we see, on the other hand, well, China is thriving in its scientific efforts, at least on the hard sciences, right? China has bought into this whole global system. So coming back to this question of language and power, I think one of the things that we need to think about is what is the way that we can use the language of science and the power of knowledge? We talk about knowledge being power in sort of everyday terms, or if we go back to Bacon's claim, right, that knowledge is power. But the question is this a way out? Is this a language of power that more countries speak, that can bring us together? This is the point of science diplomacy, right? And I think if we're looking at dealing with global challenges, can we bring in the sort of openness and shared values of science in a way that we have some kind of common ground to solve these sort of problems in ways that some of our other norms and values maybe don't provide the same kind of cohesion or credibility? So I just leave that there.
Rasmus, would you like to react on the question about the US? So bringing back in the US to the international organization, how that would affect science diplomacy, and like you consider the transatlantic relations in terms of the different frameworks and strategies, where would you like to see the focus here?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it works perfectly.
There are so many interesting questions here, and Mitchell just raised a lot of interesting questions. But so I'm a Danish national myself, and of course the Nordic countries are small, highly developed, affluent countries. And I think, for example, in Nordic countries we can have a tendency. And I could also imagine, for example, Canada and other European countries to have that line of thought, that that knowledge can cancel out or equalize power. But I think it's very important to keep in mind that knowledge and science can often, of course, especially in natural sciences and technology, it can be extremely expensive. And there you see that great economic resources can go together and be the precondition for great knowledge. And returning to a point I made earlier, I do think that, for example, for the UN system, and of course the UN system is absolutely key to addressing climate change, biodiversity, it is very important, well, it has been very important to have somebody, which has often been the United States, underwriting these organizations. And for example, the World Health Organization, the American decision to leave that, well, that seemed very counterproductive for addressing many of these global challenges, and the extent to which the United States can return to especially the UN system and UN agencies, and the United States be a very important funder, that I think is a necessary condition to address many of these global challenges in climate and biodiversity and health. And there, of course, the European Union, many individual European member states and Canada have often been very important contributors, for example, to the UN system. But I do think, despite the very important, the relatively very important, for example, Nordic or Canadian European contributions to UN organizations, my point of view as a political scientist is that I think it's very hard to make that work if you don't have somebody at the end of the table, so to say, underwriting this system. And there, just to conclude, that I mean, two very important frameworks for European-Canadian cooperation in many fields. That is, of course, science. That is, of course, NATO and the UN system. And there, the United States is the country at the end of the table in both these cases.
Okay, thank you. I would transition to another question that I think links quite nicely if Rémi would take it, but of course it's up to you. We discussed a lot about this multilateral context that you can use science diplomacy, and in the audience there was also another question: how do you effectively translate the scientific research to the policymakers so that they can make the best decisions? So here I think this links a little bit science diplomacy with science advice, and that's also part of a big part of your job, I think. So if you could take that one.
Okay, so I'll give it a try, and then of course a colleague could add to it. But maybe just before that, just to add a little bit to what Rasmus was saying, of course for us, USA, the big brother next door, 90% of our exchange on various levels are with the US. And of course, I mentioned we're happy about the election of the new president. But I think that we like it or not, we'll have to get used to not having the USA at the end of the table writing out the check. So I think change, even with the new president, the Senate will still be Republican. It will be very challenging. So over the next few years, very challenging. I think we'll have to find other way. Otherwise, we may be in deep trouble. So larger contribution from our country probably will be needed at some point. Science and science advice. Often when I talk with people here in Canada, in the world, in Quebec especially, we're used to talk about bilingualism. You have French and English. Here I say basically we have to learn the language of the others as well. So scientists have to learn the language of our policy maker, and our policy maker have to learn the language of scientists. So you don't need to be fluent in this language, but you need to know a little bit what the other one, what's the expectation on the other side. And often I will say it's not like learning French and English. It's English and Mandarin. So at first you start very, very far. So you have to build capacity. You have to give the opportunity at the level policymakers, which are very, very busy, to give them opportunity to learn a bit more about science and the other way around. Scientists learning more about the reality of the high-level policymaker, which often it's a matter of hours, not a matter of writing a PhD thesis. So I think the challenges are there, and we have started to set up various type of program in Quebec and in Canada to try to help a little bit on that, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Thank you. Martina, if I take you next, as we had it also in the program, because again, I think it fits quite nicely that I had intended to ask you to give some projections about the future of the cooperation and kind of like the next step. And somebody from the audience has a very concrete question here. He or she says, if Canada becomes an associated country, how does this change the relations with regards to science diplomacy? So maybe we go a step back and you explain a little bit the context of some of the steps that are possible, and then also touch upon the question of the audience.
Yeah. So you might know that actually the framework programs have been open to association for third countries that were geographical neighbors of Europe until now. So we have countries like Switzerland and Israel and Iceland, Norway, countries that share the borders, but also a set of values with the European Union. There has been, though, during Horizon 2020, two, let's say, big steps towards association. One, it has been the association of Ukraine, and the other one, the association of Tunisia, that are, of course, neighbors, but it kind of open up to different science diplomacy consideration that we don't have the time to do here now. But the thing is that that started actually to open to the opportunity of having a country associated to the programs that are not bordering with Europe. The only important thing is that they have a structure of research infrastructures and structure that can assure that they are like top-notch, but also that they share their democratic values and also political policy values, let's say. So while thinking about this new kind of association to the program, that means that the country gives a portion of their GDP to the program and they can participate exactly like a member state. The first countries actually Europe had in mind were first of all Canada and then other countries like, for example, Japan and South Korea that have the same set of values. For what we can know right now, the negotiation for association are still ongoing. We don't have clear positions also because they will probably start as from January to get in the second phase. There is, but Rémi, also you can, of course, adapt to this, but there is a consideration from the Canadian government towards association, but probably it wouldn't be in the very first start of the program because it has to be understood how this is going to be open, just the first pillar, first and second pillar of Horizon Europe, so basic research but not industry. So it is still under discussion. The impact of science diplomacy, I can see only a very good impact. I think that being part of the whole decision making of the definition of the work programs of Horizon Europe can actually be advantageous for the relation. But I think that even if, for example, Canada is not joining in, the system of consultation between Canada and the European Commission, it is in place. And there is this way to identify common priorities and also to align towards the future, funding joint calls on specific thematics, identifying these thematics. So it's going to be a step forward, but even if it's not happening, this is not hindering the cooperation. And we also have to keep in mind that besides having this very strong and tight with the framework program, Canada is also participating in many different multilateral research schemes. Many of them are, of course, horizon-based. So let's think about the joint programming for ambient and assisted living. It was the first one to open to international cooperation, and Canada was the first third country to enter, and they actually chaired for 1 year the AAL. They had the presidency of the JP. The same is for many ERANET that are this scheme where governments are coming together and they launch calls that are co-funded by Horizon and FP7 before. Basically, in the 90% of the ERANETs of health, Canada with the CHR was present and was funding the Canadian researchers. So we will see that under Horizon Europe we have a rationalization of the partnerships. Is going to change a little bit, but I am sure that also in the future there will be a strong contribution also from Canada in selected partnership. I see this happening especially with CHR, because this is a long-standing relation and CHR has been supporting research on health in very different ways, not only with the Directorate of RTD, Research and Innovation, but also with DG Connect, so for communication technologies. So I see this again the way forward. So to sum up, association would be good, but even if it's not happening, there are really very good already set frameworks for cooperation that can keep on giving somehow and helping the international cooperation between Europe and Canada.
Thanks a lot, Martina. Does anyone want to add something directly on this point? Okay, otherwise, Izaskun, I wanted to ask you also for your recommendations on kind of like breaking boundaries between those different spheres that speak the different languages and the silos that we might be currently experiencing.
Thank you, Elke.
Yeah.
Yes. So again, I need to come back to our work in S4D4C, and it's been through the conversation with dozens of experts coming from the diplomatic world, the scientific world, etc., that we dare to recommend to the European Commission a number of recommendations, let's say, in order to try to foster European Union science diplomacy and let science diplomacy flourish somehow. As I said, it took us a while to understand the recommendations coming from that many different experts and expertise, until we realized that basically they were all saying the same somehow. So we decided to cluster these recommendations in 5 different dimensions. The first one is knowledge. I mean, it is obvious that we need to fund research for addressing global challenges, and we need to find ways for that knowledge to somehow inform policy and the diplomatic policies as well. We need to find ways to governance with no silos. This is especially important in the European Union and because of its complexity in terms of governance, but I bet that it could be recommended as well for any other region or country in the world. We need to find ways to governance with no silos. We also recommend alliances for addressing global challenges, and this is one of the reasons why we are so happy to be here. Of course, international alliances are key. And we are also calling for institutions to change a bit the way they work, because we need them to be more agile, more versatile and permeable institutions. And we also need to start thinking on fostering. There are already, but we really think that more are needed. Knowledge brokers, institutions capable of somehow translating the knowledge in between policy and research and foreign policy, etc. And finally, people. We think this is key as well. We need to train researchers, diplomats, and policymakers in a different way that we are doing now. We need everyone to at least understand each other's language, and we need a diversification of careers as well. When we talk about the researchers, it seems that there is only one type of researchers when there are many. And we need to foster this diversification of, I don't know, a researcher being specialized in gathering knowledge from different disciplines to bring it to policymakers, for instance. These kind of professions are envisioned somehow, but they are not institutionalized. So I think this is pretty much the recommendations that we came up with.
Thank you so much. Now I also had to struggle with the muting. I would like to give a final word to Rémi, because we now have heard quite a few European voices, and I think you have the right to sum up from your Canadian perspective.
Well, I must say I agree with the colleague. We'll need your help. So all of you will need your help and your support. Hopefully, what Martina was saying, hopefully there'll be a decision soon for Canada to be more involved in a sense with various EU-related program and for the long run. I think the pandemic is helpful there. And we have talked quite a bit with both at the provincial and federal level about that. But of course, one of the issues, and it's important in the Canadian context, is that we have a minority government at the moment in Canada. And they look more at how to be sure they be reelected with a majority in a few months than any other issue. So if this can help them to be reelected, maybe they push more for that. But I think we need input from all of you, and also maybe putting pressure on some of our of your diplomats to talk about to Canadian elected officials about the beauty and the importance of more partnership between Canada and the EU in terms of science and in relation to science and innovation. And finally, training. What was mentioned as well, certainly very key to have more. Whatever I mentioned, the bilingual people, to have more of these person that knowledge broker in a sense, to build more capacity, certainly in Canada, but probably all over the place. I think will be critically important. That's something we have started to invest into in Quebec, in Canada a little bit as well, but we need to do much more on that front. Merci beaucoup.
Yeah, I think this perspective also is very interesting for the European side, that it's a lot about collaboration also with Quebec, and that it's not always the national perspective that we should look at. Rasmus, you had a final comment as well. You would like to share a thought?
Yes, thank you. It's very thought-provoking to hearing the discussion about values. I think it's important to keep in mind that, how to say, values and power are not mutually exclusive. That power is the basis of being able to exercise your values. I mean, a fantastic document as the European Convention on Human Rights basically rests on the military defeat of fascism in the Second World War. So, how to say, power is the basis of values. That's one perspective. There was also a very interesting perspective about the bridge builders. I think it was you, Izaskun, the bridge builders. And I'm very, very critical of university systems where, how to say, they're so conservative, and you do your PhD and then you have to end up like your professor. And actually what we call the alternative careers, I mean, that's the common career. It's a minority who become like their professor. So, I mean, let's stop this nonsense that you have to become your professor and everything else is alternative. No, the alternative is the norm. So let's focus on that. And becoming your professor is not very interesting. But thank you very much for an excellent couple of hours, 1.5 hours. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Rasmus. Thanks a lot. I think you are in the minority in the discussions as a professor, so I'm not countering your argument here, because I think most of us are also somehow kind of practitioners, and we are these people who want to work on these boundaries and loosening them up. And I do think that even this session, as we framed it, and that kind of like making Europe present at this CSPC conference is in a way almost an act of science diplomacy, because we did probably share some thoughts and maybe some soft diplomacy building up here, that Europe is really interested in the collaboration with Canada. We want to be present in your discourse, and we want to share the possibilities and our thinking and our visions of how science diplomacy can be done together. And not only science diplomacy, but all those aspects that have been touched upon, from science advice and science communication and linking science to the public. Thank you for bringing back this slide again as well. I think that kind of shows us also the multitude of stakeholders that we have to involve here. If you are able to see the bottom line, we really outlined there a few of those, as well as the instruments that are relevant for it. And if we have those slides already, I would ask to move to the very first slide again as well, because I would like to conclude with really inviting you to link up with us on our social media channels and on our website. You find a lot more information as well. And here on the bottom corner, you see our websites, both of the Inside project as well as of the S4D4C project. We do have some words on science diplomacy of the current commissioner, Maria Gabriel, outlining also a few very good examples. And we have an online course on European science diplomacy that actually covers quite a broad area that could be also of interest for our Canadian audience. And with this, I thank you very much. And yeah, I think we all have to say bye-bye because it's already flashing. We're concluding now. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.